kind of a short one. So what I'm going to do is give you a teaser. All right, is that all right? And then next week we'll get to the whole sermon, and maybe we'll include some discussion in that. We'll do a couple hybrid things. So we've been talking about the war within, this inner battle between the good things that God wants us to do and these other forces that kind of pull us away from there, whether you call it sin or the flesh or Satan may have something to do with it. There are things that are creating this battle within our soul between what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's sinful. And so we're doing this super exciting, happy series on sin. It will be, actually. We don't have to be afraid of looking inside ourselves, right? That self-knowledge is good. And we all want to become better. We want to become more like Christ. And so the path to that sometimes is developing good things, and sometimes it's squashing the bad things. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to use this ancient historical list called the 7 deadly sins as to be our guide through this series. Now, I want to make a sort of a statement from the beginning that 7 deadly sins is more like our popular term for it. That's not really how they're known in church history. I had someone send me a nice picture of a bottle of wine that was called the 7 deadly sins, I believe. So I don't know. We're not giving one of those out for free this morning, though. It crossed my mind. But these 7 deadly sins, as we know them, were actually known as the 7 capital vices. Doesn't that sound much more interesting? They're just capital. They came from originally out of the Desert Fathers, like in the 300s and 400s. So just a couple centuries after the time of Christ. As Christianity began to be adopted as the official religion of the Roman Empire, and what happened when Christianity got mixed with power? What does power do? All you high school graduates? Power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. That's something I remember from high school. Anyway, so the church began to be mixed with power, and it began to be corrupted. And there were obviously still sincere Christians following Christ within the church at that time. And what some of them decided to do was to withdraw from society, to go out and live in the desert, the Egyptian and Syrian deserts, I believe it was. And they became known as the Desert Fathers. They were the first monastic or monk community, okay? And out of their writings, which are some really wise and brilliant stuff and some very strange and weird stuff too, but out of their writings, we find them talking about these particular sins that keep coming up. And vices, rather than being, sins can be individual things that we do. They can be like just one-time things. Vices are habits, are patterns of behavior or thought or characteristics. Vices are things that sort of take over a part of our life, or they become habitual somehow. And so they saw 8, but it got narrowed down later to 7 of these vices as being the ones that seemed to be that everybody wrestled with. That when they went into the desert and they lived in these communities, these were the ones that were at the heart of all their other problems. And that's what the word capital means when we talk about capital vices. Capital means, capital comes from the word for head. Okay, so it means these are the head sins, the ones that are in charge, the ones that kind of lead to the other sins. All right, so that's kind of some church history there. Oh, and also it was Pope Gregory, like in the 500s or 600s, who kind of came up with the list that we have today. And he took one of them, pride, and made it the root of the other 7. And so he saw pride as like the trunk, and these other 7 that we know as the deadly sins or the capital vices as kind of what came out of pride. And then there were all kinds of other things, character issues, sins, behaviors that came off of those branches. So we have this nice, lovely tree of sin. So anyway, I want to read just one passage out of Genesis, because we're going to start talking about one particular sin or vice this morning, and I'm not going to be able to stay with the word vice, so you can understand that meaning, and just I'll be using the word sin. But this particular sin is one that I think most of us, if we think about it, and we'll have a week to think about it, we can probably find it in our own life. So Genesis chapter 4, starting at verse 1, we're in the second generation of humanity, And it says this: Adam made love to his wife Eve. I feel uncomfortable reading that. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were there in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And that's a cheery story to start Sunday morning with. Now, a few observations that aren't necessarily related to the point I want to make. But the first is that apparently in our new translation, made love to is the new lay with. You understand what I'm saying here? I remember as a kid growing up, and Adam would lay with his wife, and she'd get pregnant. And I was like, now I know what makes babies, laying down. And so I just made sure never to lay down by a girl, which is all right because I was scared of girls anyway. But now they've changed it, and I think that has something to do with the new sex ed curriculum. Interestingly enough, from a linguist standpoint, the word there actually means to know, and then it has little Hebrew characters that mean wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, that's not really true. That's supposed to be a hilarious joke. I want to point out the fact that there is, even in the very beginning, this human impulse to worship. So this is before the Bible, before God, as far as we know, appeared to them or told them to do anything. Here are these, sort of primitive humans who have this impulse somehow to reach out to the God who made them, to do something, to offer him something, to try to do something to get his attention. And one of them brings animals, and the other brings vegetables. And we learned that God is not a vegetarian. So maybe he wants us to be vegetarian, like, you guys eat the veggies, I'll take the meat. But that's kind of what he said. Now, I don't know why God didn't accept Cain's first fruits, right? Like, as a good parent, whatever my kids bring me, drawing, whatever, it's nice. I like it, it's good. Maybe it was because Cain knew what he was supposed to do and didn't do it. Sometimes if he's the oldest child, right? I'm the oldest child in my family. We have this tendency to think we're right, even when we know we're wrong. And so maybe it was just sort of the oldest child syndrome coming through, where he's like, no, I will bring vegetables, and that will be okay. I don't know. Maybe he was cheaping out. Maybe he was offering, like, the junky vegetables instead of, like, maybe he did have a sheep or something, but he was holding back and offering God his second best. So maybe there was something wrong in his heart. What I do know is that as you read the Old Testament, sometimes God can seem kind of bloodthirsty, right? He always wants all these bloody sacrifices, and you wonder, why did it really matter to him? Why did he need all these sacrifices? Well, what we believe as Christians is that when human beings sort of turned away from God, way back in this passage that we're reading here, God already knew what he was going to do. God already had a plan that he would come to earth in human form, and he would offer himself, and he would allow his own blood to be shed to redeem us, to save us, to offer us the life that he wanted to give us, to reconcile us with himself. And so we believe that God already knew that back then. And so he begins this long story knowing what the ending would be. And so all along through the story, he offers different hints about what he was going to do. So there were prophecies about the Messiah who would come. Even in Genesis passage, before we even get to hear it, there's this prophecy that eventually a human being, a son of Adam, would crush the serpent's head, would defeat Satan once and for all. And so it's interesting that God offers these little hints, as if he knows what he's going to do all along. And one of those hints is blood sacrifice. That I think that God was teaching from the very beginning, that in order for sins to be really cleansed, in order for us to really come to know him, there was a loss of life involved. That sins weren't just to be swept under the carpet, but they were serious. And so I think even from the beginning here, maybe that's what God's trying to teach. Maybe that's why he didn't like Cain's offering. I don't know, but for whatever reason, God says thanks, but no thanks to Cain's offering. Now, Cain reacts and he's furious, right? Why is he so mad? God asked that question, right? Why are you angry? Why are you downcast? He doesn't really answer, but it's an interesting question because I don't think that Cain was mad at God for not accepting his sacrifice. Because he didn't lash out at God, did he? He lashed out at Abel, his brother. It wasn't because God rejected him. It was because God rejected his sacrifice and accepted Abel's. God says to him, if you do what's right, you'll be accepted. There's nothing wrong with you. I don't like you less. I just didn't like your vegetables. Just offer me meat like I want. It'll be all good. But Cain was mad. Cain was downcast or sad about it. And God warns him. He says, sin is crouching at your door. It wants to have you, to possess you, to come into control in your life. But you must rule over it. I don't know if you ever feel that way, like that sin is sort of lurking. Like you're on the right track, you're doing everything okay, but there's always this lurking. Like, if I just gave into that, I'd be way off track. I don't know if you ever felt like, almost like an outside force takes over. Paul certainly did. He writes a lot about it in Romans 7, where he talks about wanting to do something, but not being able to. Wanting to do what's right, but then when I try to do what's right, evil's right there with me. He talks about sin, not so much as things we do, but a force that is at work in our lives. Almost like the force, right? The dark side of the force that's always pulling us to come over to it, right? So sin is kind of like this force in our lives, crouching at the door, ready to kind of take over, to take control. But God says, but you must rule over it, or you can rule over it. Now, for those of you anybody read John Steinbeck's East of Eden? I read that book last year, the year before, and it's a whole play on this theme of Cain and Abel. I thought it was a brilliant book, and really enjoyed reading it. And he has this one passage where they talk about this very passage, and they talk about the Hebrew word for you can rule over it, or you must rule over it. It's Timshel. Any Mumford and Sons fans? Anyone admit to being a Mumford & Sons fan? I like them. So they have a song called Timshel, based on the book by John Steinbeck, which is based on this passage in the Bible. Isn't that, a nice little family tree of art there? Anyway, the point is that sin wants to take over us, and we have a choice. We have a choice in the matter. Sometimes we're tempted to be like, oh, you know what, it just took over, and I couldn't help it. The devil made me do it, or whatever. And this kind of makes it clear that we have a role in it. Sin's crouching at the door, yeah, it wants to take over, but we need to rule over it. And so that's what happened. And Cain obviously lost that inner battle. He lost in this war with him. And so what happened, obviously he invited his brother to the field and killed him. And the story goes on from there. But this is the main point. Murder wasn't actually the big sin. I mean, yeah, it is big as far as its results. But the sin that took over in Cain's heart was the sin of envy. Envy is one of the 7 capital sins because it leads us to do all kinds of other things that are unhealthy, that block our relationship with God and other people. Envy is basically having a negative emotional reaction to the well-being of another person. Okay? A negative emotional reaction to the well-being of another person. In this case, Cain was angry and downcast because of the success of his brother. All right? So that's what envy is. It's sadness, annoyance, grumpiness, anger, when we perceive that someone else somehow has it better than us. Now, what should we feel when we see other people who have it better than us? If we were perfect, if we were good, if we were truly like God, we would be happy for them. We would rejoice with them. How many here sometimes struggle not being happy when someone else does well? Now, let me give you a few of the traits of envy. First of all, it's the silent sin. Okay, it's the one that we're least likely to admit. It's the least fun of the 7. All right, nobody has fun when they're envious. The other things can at least be fun short term, but nobody ever has fun when they're envying someone else. It also works best at close range, which means rarely do we envy people who are extremely different than us. I don't go around struggling with envy for Bill Gates. There's just so much difference between us that it doesn't happen. We tend to envy people who are somehow comparable to us. Friends, neighbors, peers, colleagues, co-workers, brothers and sisters. For me personally, other pastors. As I thought about this week, I thought, yeah, that's where I struggle with it the most. I'm good friends with Kai from Harvest, right? When we both launched at the same time, we're both celebrating 7 years. Harvest is slightly larger than our church by about 10 times. And over the years, I have struggled with envy. Now, I haven't always been able to label it as that, but I realize I come away from a conversation or something, and I come away a little grumpy. I'm like, I don't even know why I'm grumpy. Oh, wait, because he talked about hiring his 10th staff person. Right. You know, or whatever. You can tell him I said this. It's on the internet. I haven't struggled with wanting to kill him or anything like that. But this is how it comes out in our lives, is that someone who is kind of like us, but we perceive to somehow be doing better than us, we get a little grumpy at that. We get a little sad. Okay? And so what we tend to do, a couple other things about envy is it's a small town sin. All right? So because we're all in a small town and we tend to see each other and see how everybody else is doing, that leaves more room for this sin to grow. It happened a lot among, like, in monastic communities where people were very close to each other. Envy would enter in. It also tends to be a same-sex sin. Men tend to envy men. Women tend to envy other women. And one of the things that it does, tell me if you can identify with this, is it exaggerates their good luck and your bad luck. Like, oh, if only I'd had the breaks they had, then I'd be there. It couldn't be about their talent, or it couldn't be about their hard work. It's about, them having all the luck. And me, I've just been dealt a raw deal. And so that's kind of how envy takes place. For me, I had to come up with reasons why Harvest was so much bigger than us, okay? Well, they're just not being faithful to the whatever. And, I didn't really spend a lot of time on this, but I wanted to give you, just a little bit of evidence that I'm sinful too, because I know sometimes you guys think I'm perfect. Right, exactly. All right, so how does it come out? Let me just run through some of the ways it comes out. It comes out in a sense of entitlement. It comes out in just a general feeling of depression. Everybody else has it better than me. It comes out in anger at God, at luck, at life. It comes out in suspicion. Maybe the world's out to get me. Teasing, bullying, gossip, criticism, these things about putting other people down. One of the books I read in preparation said probably 80% of the criticism that we do is rooted in envy. I thought, ooh, that's probably pretty true, isn't it? There's a great German word. I'm sure I'll pronounce it right. Where's Jen? Schadenfreude. You know that word? No. It means, maybe you would if I pronounced it right. It means, maybe it sounds more like a positive emotional reaction when we perceive others have it worse. This is the opposite side of envy. Have you ever felt happy when someone else failed or did bad? Great quote here. In the misfortune of our best friends, we always find something that is not displeasing to us. In the misfortune of our best friends, we always find something that is not displeasing to us. I think areas where envy can come in, parenting, like, why are their kids so good? Man, they got lucky with their kids. But if I had had blah, 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 then my kids, or the spouse, how come her husband always seems so romantic? And I wish mine would just get off the couch. Career success, I'm just as good as him. How come he got all the breaks? Natural gifts, intelligence, good looks. I wish I was as smart as her, as good looking as her. I wish I could sing like that. Money. I make enough money myself. So now this is a little bit of a something you have to figure out the difference between. Greed is wanting based on just wanting. All right. Envy is wanting based on them having. Like, I make enough money myself, but suddenly I find out my brother makes like twice as much as me, and I feel like I should make more too. Right? That's envy. Okay. All right. House or car, same sort of deal, right? Like, you might just want a BMW, and that might be fine. But if you want a BMW because the neighbor has a BMW, then that's envy. Or you might want a BMW and it's because you're greedy. I don't know why it is. I can't judge your desire for a BMW. But envy is always about the comparison with other people, and it always targets our sense of self-worth. Okay, it sends this message. It targets our eyes on the outer stuff, but it sends a message deep within that says, you don't stack up. You're not as good as them. And so often we get very defensive against this, and that's why we have to put the other person down, because on the inside, we're beginning to feel put down. Because envy puts us down. Envy sends the message, you're not good enough. And so we feel the need to pass that message along, right? Well, if I'm not good enough, then I don't want them to be either. And so the solution to envy is to find our sense of self, our sense of value, not in how we stack up to other people, but in the love of the Father. And that is the essence of envy. That's where we find our solution. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. It's 12 o'clock. I just saw that. So that's enough. You can think about it, begin to look for it in your life. And we'll talk next week about becoming more rooted in God's love and how that can help us get past this. Let's pray, and then we'll go. God, I want to thank you so much for this time together. Thanks for Shane. Thanks for the music we could sing to you. Thanks for each person that's here. God, help us. Help us get more and more in touch with your love for us. Help us develop true love for each other so that we can rejoice in the success and the prosperity and the goodness that other people experience. We don't have to feel envious. As we spend the next week sort of thinking about this, God, I pray you would shine your flashlight in the dark corners of our lives so we can see the things that we're not all that excited about admitting or looking at. But we need to look at so we can become all that you have for us. As we go out from here, God, may we shine our lights in the darkness. May we live on mission for you, to share your love and to share your good news with those that we interact with on a daily basis. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you back here next week.